This is Telling It Like It Is, our weekly look at the stories making the headlines, as discussed by the writer and broadcaster Tim Ecott, the former Kremlin advisor Alexander Nekrassov, and political analyst, of course. My name is Brendan Cole. Alexander, Russian aviation experts have arrived in Kiev ahead of a visit to the site of this the tragic doomed flight MH17 crash. Belarus is hosting talks, actually, between Ukraine, Russia and the OSCE on the crisis in Ukraine, and sanctions are about to be announced. Is Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, feeling the pressure of all this?
Well, I suppose that Russia is feeling the pressure on the one hand, but on the other hand, I think that there are serious flaws in the version of events presented by the Western side. I mean about the downing of the plane. And I think that what has happened is that everybody is now recalling what happened in 2001. When the Ukrainian armed forces shot down by mistake during maneuvers a Russian passenger plane. And for about 4 weeks they denied any responsibility until satellite imagery showed specifically that a missile was fired and it brought down that plane. So in a sense we are seeing something repeating itself again, because there is no proof yet coming from the Western intelligence services about who actually downed this plane. The proof is mostly presented, proof in inverted commas, by Americans who are saying, we've got the proof, but we're not showing it to you yet. Now, at least the Russians have showed something, of some imagery showing those Buk anti-aircraft missile battalions on the ground around Donetsk, Ukrainian army ones. And at least there is a connection. And also, by the way, there was a very, very impressive photo of one of the parts of the plane, which showed that it was possibly brought down by a machine gun from the from the plane, from a jet fighter. I mean, it was used as well, because there are distinct holes, bullet from bullets. So the so-called inspectors, and I call them so-called inspectors from the European Union, were telling us for 5 days they couldn't get to that location, and because of the fighting. Well, meanwhile, reporters from all over the place went to that location and reported from there. There was no fighting there. So I think the Russian inspectors, Russian investigators, they should be present at what's going on there to avoid any misunderstandings, as I call them.
Okay, and Alexander, if there is an independent investigation, which Russia has always been calling for, does the Kremlin have faith that that investigation can be impartial? And will they follow its conclusions? Well,
I don't think the Kremlin has a lot of faith if it's going to be conducted solely by the Western investigators. At the moment, there's more of a propaganda war around this plane rather than there's sort of a situation when people want to hear the truth. The sort of stuff which is coming from Western capitals, it reminds me of the worst days of the Cold War. Now, we have had reports of shelling of residential areas in and around Donetsk by the Ukrainian army, and a lot of casualties. In Ukraine itself, by the way, the media is reporting that the death count in the eastern part of Ukraine is about 100 people, when the United Nations itself had to admit recently that the death count has, among civilians, has reached 1,150, and about 3,000 are wounded. So you can understand what sort of propaganda is coming out of Kyiv, Washington, and other places.
Okay, so disinformation on both sides seems to be what you're saying. This week, Tim, though, a report from the Defence Select Committee has emerged about Russia and about how NATO viewed the threat of Russia. I mean, what was described in that report? What were some of its conclusions?
Well, it's very interesting. This is, as you point out, Brendan, the House of Commons Defence Select Committee. MPs in Britain listening to expert evidence. And whether it's part of a propaganda war or not, you listeners must judge for themselves. But they've basically come out and said that the Ministry of Defence has failed to keep a watchful enough eye on Russia. They, of course, are repeating the position that Russia poses some kind of a threat to states beyond its borders. And they're saying that NATO really has taken its eye off the ball. They've not been mounting military exercises. They don't have arms and supplies and equipment ready. And they think that actually Britain and other NATO nations have been, in effect, negligent, because their position is what's to stop Russia deciding that it wants to step outside the borders of the Russian Federation. And they, of course, use Ukraine as the example of a situation that could potentially be repeated or could get bigger or worse in the coming years.
Now, Israel has mobilized 16,000 additional reservists. It's stepping up its military operations in the Gaza Strip. In fact, this is the longest battle it's had with militants in Gaza ever. 24 days now. It beat the previous record by 2 days. There is a backlash, however, over the shelling of a UN shelter this week. Alexander, I guess the concerns is that at the relative impotence of the United States, but it's still funding Israel, isn't it, to the tune of $3 billion a year?
Well, of course, the U.S. is funding Israel simply because it's using it as the fall guy, because guess where all the fanatics across from the Middle East will now go after this war in Gaza. Instead of attacking American interests across the world and in the Middle East, they will now go after Israel. And I can tell you something. I've been in touch with some people in Israel, and I've asked them, do they support this war? And they said, of course not, because this war has turned us into a target. And I think this is, again, America behind this, because America desperately needs some sort of a distraction. It has failed dramatically in Iraq and Libya. It's going to fail in Afghanistan. The Balkans are again in trouble. There's a serious problem there brewing up. And of course, they need some sort of a serious distraction. Presto comes Netanyahu. He sends the boys in. And now we are seeing those reports by the Western media. By the way, have you ever asked yourself, Tim, why is it that the BBC, ABC, NBC, CNN would be showing all the carnage in such detail in Gaza if supposedly Israel has such dominance over the American policy? So America is what? Allowing all these media outlets to show all of this carnage? What did you ever think it was suspicious? Tim, I'm asking you.
Did I think it was suspicious? No, I think it's just a fact. The cameras go where there are dead bodies. I mean, I don't quite understand your point. Are you saying that somehow these are fake bodies, or that they're only shown?
My point is that if the media, which is controlled, you know perfectly well, by certain interests, if the media is suddenly showing every dead child, every dead woman,
well, they're not.
Every bombed
they're
school,
not showing every dead child. No, there's been a big debate here in Britain in the media about whether they should, in fact, be showing more gruesome pictures.
Well,
because
they've showed a lot. I mean, they're reporting at prime time. This is prime time news, right? Now, isn't it strange?
When 1,200 civilians get killed by a vastly superior
in Ukraine,
military
we have
force.
a similar situation. They didn't find it important enough to show that. Israel is being demonized on orders of the American government because the American press no longer does something itself. It is now getting orders. Excuse me, but I know how propaganda is made. I was the first spin doctor in Russia, and I was considered to be one of the best.
But BBC isn't really known for taking its orders from America.
Well, BBC has been known for taking its orders from the Foreign Office. It has been known, especially on foreign policy.
And Sky News?
Well, Sky News is doing what Americans tell her, and Murdoch is pro-American.
But on this point, do you think, Tim, that Hamas have made political gains from these very gruesome images that we've been seeing? This has worked into the hands of Hamas there in terms of how global sympathy is now on their side.
I think there is definitely a wave of sympathy directed at the Palestinian territory because, as Alexander says, the media have been showing endless images of what are clearly children and innocent civilians who are suffering as a result of Israeli military action. But I think you have to be careful in labeling that as some kind of propaganda war. There is no doubt in PR terms it has been negative for Israel. There have in fact been many reports from around the world of anti-Semitic feeling being generated by people conflating the idea of what it means to be a Jew with what it means to be an Israeli and to defend Israel as a sovereign nation. But I think there's a wider issue going on here, which that Israel is only one part of the Middle East, which is in uproar at the moment. Israel versus Gaza, Iraq, Iran, Egypt, Syria, wherever you look, the whole border situation, the whole border lines, the whole certainties of who was in control of that volatile and relatively new set of nations is having to be re-examined. And many Middle Eastern experts are now saying that forget this being resolved in 6 months or a year or even 5 years. This is the new world order when it comes to the Middle East. The Western powers have lost interest to an extent in controlling some of the nations that are now in turmoil. But, this has been compared by some modern analysts to a new French Revolution. In 50 years' time, we'll be looking at a very different set of borders, a very different set of political certainties in the Middle East. And no one can predict which way it's going to go.
Well, I can predict chaos because, excuse me, but after the invasion of Iraq, disastrous invasion, Bush and Blair were warned by experts, by intelligence officers, that this will create a chain reaction throughout the whole of Middle East, which it did. Then in Libya, this disastrous invasion, which was presented as some sort of export of democracy. Now it is one of the most volatile countries in the world. And by the way, Americans have pulled out their embassy this week.
But it was an uprising among the people of Libya themselves.
Well, it was an uprising which was hijacked. It was hijacked by jihadists, and it was supported by the Western countries. And by the way, the Chilcot inquiry into the war in Iraq, which for some reason cannot come up with a conclusion. There should be an inquiry into the war, into the invasion in Libya, because that was an outrageous intervention by the West. There should be lessons made from that as well.
But it was a UN sanction, no-fly zones was set up.
The UN nowadays will rubber stamp anything the Americans want. This is another issue. The UN
it is a different situation to Iraq, though, isn't it? I mean, I guess the point Tim is making is that potentially a country like Libya, which may be reconfigured, we won't know for sure for decades, because this is a revolution. It's like the French Revolution, and that took decades of bloodshed before
the whole of the Arab Spring was caused by the Iraq invasion. Everybody now understands that, and that was a chain reaction throughout the whole of the region.
But what do you do now? I mean, you may or may not be right. There are plenty of people who agree with you. There are plenty of people who say that was the start of a chain reaction, but that's ancient history now.
No, we have to get Americans out of the Middle East to stop meddling in the affairs of some of the countries there. Until they continue this, there will be no peace. There will be war everywhere. Just look at Afghanistan. Everybody is anticipating a bloodbath. The moment those troops go, the Taliban will take over. Can you imagine what they'll...
Alexander, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, people were saying we have to get Russia out of Afghanistan.
Yes, but that was a different story. It was a communist dictatorship. The people had no voice there. When you have a so-called democracy like America or Britain or France invading other countries, that's a completely different story.
Interesting comments from the scientist who helped discover the Ebola virus. He said the outbreak in West Africa was unlikely to trigger a major epidemic outside the region, and that the gentleman involved, Professor Peter Pio, said he would happily sit next to an infected person on the tube. Tim, we're getting assurances from ministers about
I didn't like the way you made that link there. I did come to work by tube this morning. It was me that was coughing, not the person next to me.
But if it was somebody next to you coughing, do you think Ebola would be contained if it reached Britain? Ministers seem to think so.
Well, I think there are confusing messages coming out here. I interviewed somebody from the WHO about a month ago and asked this very question. Can it not spread relatively easily? Aren't we looking at a doomsday scenario here? And he said, oh, no, don't worry, because anybody who has Ebola will feel so ill, the last thing they'll have on their mind is to go and get on an aeroplane. I found that a slightly surprising answer at the time. And, of course, only this week have we learnt that a man flying internally within West Africa did travel from, I think it was Sierra Leone or Guinea, to Lagos, where he then was sufficiently ill to be taken to hospital. Someone in Birmingham this week in England was taken to hospital for tests, having arrived with a fever, and apparently a lady has arrived in Hong Kong from East Africa, who they've quarantined in case she's got Ebola. So difficult to criticise the authorities in these various countries for taking precautions, but it does seem kind of counterintuitive that we should have Jeremy Hunt on British television saying oh, we've got a very good national health service, there's nothing to worry about. The fact is, this is a very good virus. And I would be nervous if someone was coughing and their baggage label said they just arrived from Liberia.
I can predict you that the pharmaceutical companies will be soon offering every single person in Britain, a vaccine.
There is no vaccine.
Well, I tell you, they will invent it. How you know how they did it in the past with bird flu and so on. Obviously, it looks all very naive because if this virus, if we are told how dangerous it is, gets into the country, it will start spreading. But also, I also heard that although 700 people have already died, there are many people who have suffered from it and didn't die. And I also heard that actually the body, if the immune system is not damaged in a human body, it can withstand Ebola quite easily. Well,
I didn't
relatively.
know
Well,
that.
Well,
that's what
it's
I
certainly
heard.
interesting if you look at the statistics, the number of casualties in different countries, and the survival rate correlates very directly with the level of medical facilities available in those countries.
It reminds me a bit of the SARS crisis about 10, 15 years ago.
Exactly. Yes.
Interesting stuff. So there will have to be restrictions on who comes into the country, and that certainly was discussed this week. David Cameron announced a new set of measures to limit the numbers of immigrants entering Britain and cut down on benefits and housing alliances to them. This is part of his policy, or the key plank of it is a job seekers allowance would be limited to 3 months to foreigners, and free housing would be also restricted. Tim, will this raise the kind of money that David Cameron would like to see raised, or is this more symbolic than anything?
I think it's symbolic. I mean, there are rumours. I'm going to sound like Alexander now. There are inside sources that have made it known in Downing Street that the Conservatives' election strategist, Lyndon Crosby, has apparently advised Mr Cameron that at least once a week he should come out with a statement which looks as if he's getting tough on immigration. So this follows on from the cabinet reshuffle a couple of weeks ago. It follows on from the threat from UKIP, about whom we've heard much less in recent days. But it really is about the Conservatives being seen to be tough on immigration, which they know is their Achilles heel come 2015, because it's the stick that their opponents have managed to beat them over the head with. They're too soft on immigration. They're handing out too much money to these dastardly EU migrants who come in, and even if they're not on benefits, and remember Mr Cameron came up with the incredibly clever plan that he should restrict their access to benefits for the first 3 months of their stay in the country. But now it's emerged that in fact Britain is paying out many millions a week in tax credits to EU migrant workers in the EU, which dwarfs any kind of social security benefits that they would be due anyway.
£5 billion a year, in fact, and this policy announced this week would save £500 million, so not even 10%, Alexander.
Well, you know, it's all about UKIP, obviously, the Conservatives trying to put them in the shade. But the point about this whole policy initiatives is that, my personal opinion is that Cameron will win, the Conservatives will win, it will be a coalition again. I don't understand what the fuss is about. Well, bearing, of course, if there's some major disaster and half of the cabinet come out as pedophiles or something, I think it will be exactly the same arrangement. It will be another 5-year term. And basically, I don't understand why they need all these weekly initiatives, especially in August, for example, when nobody listens anyway. Everyone's away on holidays. So I think it's just Cameron is being told by his advisors porkies, to be honest, because his advisors want him to be nervous about the situation, about the forthcoming election.
Well, he does need to be nervous because the polls consistently show that he's not guaranteed to win next time around. Even with your support, Alexander.
Well, it's not my support, it's just that the common sense tells you that Ed Miliband has no chance. You know, even whatever the polls say. I don't trust the polls, by the way. I think these opinion polls are misleading. I would even ban all opinion polls a month before election because they mislead people about the real situation. So, in any case, I don't think this will work until Britain is part of the European Union. It can't stop. It can't stop foreign migrants from European Union have the same rights as the people of Britain. So that's useless.
Now, the government's also opened the bidding this week for companies looking at shale gas extraction, known as fracking. This is when you blast rocks and release the gas contained therein. The bidding process is set to allow companies to explore the potential for fracking in around half of the UK, except for those areas of outstanding natural beauty. I mean, what did you make of that? Is this some kind of climb down, Tim, to appease the environmentalists? Because environmentalists don't seem to be particularly happy with what was announced this week anyway.
Indeed, fracking has become a dirty word. I'm not entirely sure myself whether it is a good idea or not. There are certainly lots of government reports out there claiming that it's much less damaging than people fear, and that the example of the mistakes that were made in the USA will not be repeated here. So if we trust the government experts, there doesn't seem to be too much to worry about. On the other hand, the renewable energy sector, which always sounds like a nice way to protect the planet and cut down reliance on fossil fuels, is lagging behind what it set out to achieve, and Britain is failing to meet its carbon reduction targets. It's certainly not going to meet the 2020 ones, and probably not the 2030. So you can see why politicians get very excited about fracking and think, given how much it's reduced the USA's dependency on oil imports and indeed domestic oil production, fracking looks like a gift, money in the bank for free.
That's right, Alexander. What do you think about that? Britain wants to have less reliance on overseas gas imports. No prizes for guessing where one of those key importers they want to rely less a bit on, but also the Middle East as well.
Well, dream on, I say to them, because they would like to cut dependence on Russian gas and oil and be self-sufficient. I don't think this will work. Already, what has been happening in America is that they had serious environmental problems in the areas where they were fracking. Even earthquakes, by the way, and not to mention houses suddenly disappearing underground for no reason. So I don't really think this will work in Britain. I think it's much better to actually sort out the mess now and have proper relations with Russia.
We certainly can't afford to lose any more houses.
No more houses.
We can't afford to lose any houses. If fracking threatens to suck houses underground,
another reason why
the housing crisis will get even worse.
Why it's not a good idea, yes. So I don't think it will work. There were estimates made in Russia how long it would take the Western Europe to switch to different suppliers and different resources and so on. It turns out about 25 years it would take them. So I think this propaganda war saying that, we can't depend on Russia anymore, we have to be self-sufficient, or you change the suppliers, yes, but it'll take you guys 25 years. So that's what I'm saying.
To be fair, Britain doesn't actually depend on Russia for energy.
No, it depends a lot. Russian petrol and Russian gas.
When you use the word depend, it implies that if you didn't have Russian gas, Britain wouldn't be able to function.
Well, there will be problems. There will be big problems. At the moment, it can't switch, it can't change. For the next 5-10 years, no chance. And that's why, again, it just raises the question, why on earth should the West follow the example of America that has nothing to lose practically from its sanctions, apart from ExxonMobil ordering a hit, probably on Obama, because they can't stand the man for what he's done to them. ExxonMobil is terrified because they're going to lose their contracts and they're going to be kicked out of Russia. And of course, immediately other companies will come in and take it over. And they have been to see Barack Obama. They have been talking to him and to his administration. Not a chance. Nothing.
Quite a busy week for policy announcements, given that Parliament is in recess and it's supposed to be the silly season. But this week, ministers and officials considering an idea that could bring major changes to England's student loan system. This is quite a complex idea, but at its heart, I guess, is universities could take on some of the risk that their own students pay. This could mean that universities buy back, in essence, the debt. Tim, what do you think about this? This could make university more amenable for people of poorer backgrounds, or do you think this could mean a change in universities' admissions policy?
Well, that's the worry, isn't it? The suggestion is that if universities buy up student debt, which at the moment falls to the government to try to recover the loans that they make virtually automatically to anyone who gets a university degree place after leaving school, that somehow the universities could administer that debt and perhaps make a profit on it. How do you make a profit? You obviously cut something somewhere to bring in more money somewhere else. And the idea is that people are worried that they will therefore start attracting students to degrees that seemingly guarantee you a high-paying job, whether that's medicine or engineering or what have you, or perhaps fracking degrees, Alexander.
Yes, of course,
But,
yes. Or retail degrees.
People
yes.
who want to study Russian literature or scholastic philosophy or anthropology or something like that will suddenly be told, we don't want your debt, therefore we don't really want you as a student. That's the worry. I personally think this is yet another crack in the whole edifice of government policy on higher education, privatizing the university financing and funding process so that universities now act as little mini empires and businesses. And they tout for business, they tout for students, they build facilities that they think will attract students, and they offer degrees that they think people will go for on the basis that they will get a job. It is resulted in the dumbing down of students, the dumbing down of the degrees they pursue. And the biggest scandal is that most of the students are not getting good value for money, but they're saddling themselves with a huge debt which will prevent them buying a house, prevent them, paying off that debt. It's more wasted money. They should just give a smaller percentage of people university places if they're really interested in academic excellence, but they're not. They're interested in bums on seats, getting everybody to be able to claim that they have a university degree and ripping off all the students for as much money as they can while they're at university.
And it comes in a week, Alexander, where statistics reveal 2 million young people aged between 20 and 34 live at home. Many of them are saddled with the debt from their university days.
Well, I think, first of all, universities buying students' debt is crazy. It's just stupid. It's just like Goldman Sachs suddenly introducing elements of Goldman Sachs into higher education. Secondly, I think it's very simple to sort out the universities, higher education. You force the banks to pay, and big companies as well, because they are themselves interested in getting people who are well qualified. So you put a levy on them, and to hell with their complaints, because higher education, that's the way they do it in America. In America, they pretend that these big boys are giving hundreds of millions to universities because they feel like it. No, they don't. They give it because they're forced by the state to give this money, but in return there are tax advantages. The same should happen here. I am tired of hearing bonuses being paid in the city, 12 billion, 15 billion, to each bank. Let's cut those bonuses and let's move that money to universities and let's give them some sort of tax relief in return for that. But big corporations need to understand, if universities don't produce good students, they will not have people to hire. So I think it works for both ways, and I think that's the best way out.
From student loans to artistic ones, Tracy Emin's bed worth £2.2 million will be exhibited in the Tate Modern on loan from Count Christian Durkheim. Is it worth all that money? And now we can see it anytime we want.
Well, it's worth as much as somebody's prepared to pay for it. I happen to think that Tracy Emin is a very talented artist. In fact, she's one of the, well, they're not so young anymore, but when they were, the YBAs, as they were called, the Young British Artists, who were patronised by Nicholas Serotto at Tate Modern, and Saatchi, of course, who started buying up their works when they were students. I actually think she has produced the most original work. And I think the bed is a very powerful piece. It symbolises the state of chaos that her life was in at the time. And it's very, very effective. It conjures up an image of what her life was like when she was, not in a stable relationship. She was unhappy. And, you look at it and you suddenly understand that person's feelings. And that's what art should do.
No, I'm lost for words here. I don't even know how to respond to that. I can only recall the incident when 2 Japanese tourists made up that bed when they thought it was just a bed that wasn't made. And
what would we learn from going into your bedroom, Alexander?
No. I think that, first of all, this is not art. And Nicholas Serotto
It is art because it makes you feel something.
Well, it doesn't make you feel anything. And
it made the Japanese tourists feel like tidying up her room.
Has done a huge damage to the art scene in Britain by accepting so-called artworks like that. And this is basically we are allowing people to get away with anything they want.
Has it damaged the art scene when it gets 5 million people a year to go into Tate Modern?
It just proves that the art world has lost all sense of direction. And you can now get away with anything you want. We are moving into some sort of savagery now. And I don't understand. Okay, this German count, he thinks it's a great work of art. Why didn't he keep it to himself? Why didn't he keep this unmade bed in one of his castles or something and spared us all this indignation? Well, I mean, it's embarrassing. I'm sorry, I have no other words for that.
It's not actually compulsory for you to go and look at it.
Well, I know, but you can't put it in a gallery which is funded by the public in part, unfortunately. You can't do this.
Especially if there are used condoms on the floor. I think there was with the original one.
You can't say those words on radio.
We can't, absolutely not. I couldn't say Durkheim either, but there we have it. So, did you know that the average Briton has watched his or her favourite film 29 times, Tim? This is according to a poll, and psychologists reckon that it's because of the smartphone and all the gadgets that makes it very hard for us to concentrate on a film, and so it means that we have to keep on watching it over and over again.
I thought we watched it repeatedly because we loved it. That's why I keep watching The Sound of Music.
Sound of Music? You watch The Sound of Music?
It's an unbeatably... The mark of a good film is if you start watching it and you can't stop. I defy you to start watching The Sound of Music and not get to the end.
For me, it's Shawshank Redemption. I always have to watch that right to the end, yes.
It's the silliest film about a prison I have ever seen. It is just embarrassingly
Okay, so what's a film that you start watching and you can't stop?
No, I don't watch repeats. You know, I only watch repeats after I've had a few. And I just sit there on the sofa and watch aimlessly at the screen. But I can tell you something. Honestly, I saw the list. Back to the Future. A silly trilogy. The other one, I think, was...
it was made for children and teenagers.
I know, but it's the grown-ups who watch it. Now, the Indiana Jones films. Steven Spielberg, I think, okay, well, he made some funny films, but you can't really watch 29 times a film like Indiana Jones or something. Star Wars. Now, Star Wars looks like a computer game. No?
The original Star Wars.
I mean the films. They look like computer games. So how can you watch a computer game, just not playing, watching, for 29 times? I think it's the dumbing down of television now.
It's not. I disagree with you there. I'm not a big fan of Star Wars. I'm not one of those people who's watched it 27 times. But it is an archetypal myth story. It is good versus evil, and you have a young hero battling against, in effect, the ghost of his father. That's Shakespeare. That's
Shakespeare. Blimey.
A cartoon this week in the newspaper. The German newspaper Bild sends up poor old Brits. They've been portrayed as drunk, lazy louts.
Intolerant, by the way. Intolerant as well, which I found strange, by the way, because I thought Brits are tolerant, no? Intolerant. I think it's the Germans are behind it, no? I think it's the Germans.
Is this a fair characterization, Tim?
Of course it's not.
Well, this is, as you say, Brendan, a cartoon in Bild which seems to portray Britons on holiday. I think it was sparked by some kind of survey on the island of Majorca, which I'm told many Germans believe is actually part of Germany. I think there are more than 100,000 Germans permanently resident in Majorca. And if you ask a lot of them who Majorca belongs to, they will tell you Germany.
Oh, good for them. But this is deeply unfair, of course. So for them to claim that the Brits are, boozers and intolerant, covered in tattoos, it's just not fair.
Well, Britons are the most tattooed nation in the world, apparently, and I think on
Says
holiday.
Who? Says
It's a scientific survey.
All right, okay.
Most
I don't
tattooed,
trust
yes,
those
more than the
surveys.
South Sea Islanders, and I think some British holidaymakers in the Mediterranean have been observed consuming alcohol.
Well, so much for Anglo-Russian relations. Anglo-Teutonic relations don't seem to be an awful lot better. That's all we've got time for. Telling it like it is, our weekly look at the stories making the headlines, as discussed by Alexander Nekrassov, Tim Ecott. My name is Brendan Cole. This is the Voice of Russia in London.